WBNews.com. I'm John Scott.
Let's get it started in here.
The viewpoints of J. Michael McCoy, his co-hosts, guests, and callers are not necessarily those of any particular religion or denomination. They may or may not be the views of Webcast One Live, the cleaning guy, the woman who brings in cookies, the parking valet, the staff of The View from A Pew, Jill King, Lucinda, the graphic design lady, Justin, Bob, Brian, Linda, or anyone else of sound mind or questionable mental capacity. Should you be offended, provoked, triggered, intimidated, shocked, confused, or inspired to think independently, call our studio lines at 515-442-KPOG and join the conversation. After all, it's your voice we want to hear. Now, live from the Jordan Crossing Studios, here's your host,
Frank the Verse Thomas.
Well, hello and good afternoon. It is Frank the Verse Thomas here at View from the Pew. And we would like to encourage you to give your input to the show. Got some input from Brian yesterday. He said it was one of the best shows that he's heard so far. But he requested that possibly I give a few more positive news stories, to which your wish is my command. I'm going to give you a few positive news stories today. Let me get my volume up here a little bit. So if you'd like to contact the show and you can give me your input, you can do so by jogging this phone number down in your cell phone, and you can use it to both talk and text me. And you can do so by following these set of instructions.
We want to hear from you, so give us a call on the Service Legends talk and text line, 515-442-5764. That's 515-442-KPOG.
We do our show here at Jordan Crossing 4 to 6 p.m. every day, Monday through Friday, and that is at the...
Live from the Yellow Blue Studios, your home for the light from LED Lighting. This is KPOG Grimes, West Des Moines.
So, let me check my volume here. So, last night, y'all know that there was a Democratic debate last night. So the best line I've heard so far today, and I don't know who said it, but you know, because I have the TV on in the morning as I'm getting ready to go, and I don't know who exactly said it, but one of the funniest things I heard in the post debate was the only thing missing from last night's debate was the Cuban national anthem. And if you really analyze that, it was the truth. They were doing their best to see who could give away the most things to Americans. I think they used to call that trying to buy your vote. But now it's just standard state of affairs for American politics to see how much a candidate can give away. You know, y'all kind of remember John Kennedy. I mean, am I the only one that's that old that is in the room? No, I'm the only one in the room. Besides my guardian angel and Jesus. But do you think John Kennedy could say in 2019, if he were running for president, you know, to basically, I paraphrase here a little bit, but ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. You think that would go over like a lead balloon in 2019? Well, I don't know. We're in something called the lukewarm Laodicea church. It's a lazy, apathetic church. The people in it are really in need of nothing. As I said, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day whose grandson has had everything given to him. And my friend was saying that the kid no longer wants to mind. He just wants to be belligerent. He don't want to be respectful to his parents. And that's kind of the way it is with the millennial generation, is because they've been handed everything. They're in need of nothing. So, I don't know. I guess the things you actually have to work for are the things that are the most appreciated in life. I know when if you're given a motorcycle, you're given a bicycle, you're given something as a kid, it doesn't seem that bad of a deal to tear it up. But you notice when you have to start paying for things yourself, those things all of a sudden become a little bit more valuable because you know what it took to earn it. Therefore, you don't want to tear something up that you had to pay for and that you're just going to have to fix yourself. So, children today, and it's been getting worse since, as I said the other day, we got into the Industrial Revolution in 1830. And it's just been getting increasingly as technology excels every 10 years, every decade. The laziness and the apathy and the lukewarm Christianity just excels every 10-year decade period also. So we're at the point now where it's give me generation, and God is patient, but God is not going to be patient forever. So we're going to talk a little bit today about all things Pharisees, or Pharisaical. I'm going to talk about Ezekiel the prophet during our Sabbath school lesson. I have some Christian news stories that I will share with you. But let me get over onto the other computer. Let me bump this volume up a bit. Because as I said, the commercials are always a little too, potentially too hot for radio, but the voices on air seem to need a little bit more volume. Let me start out with a couple of news stories. Here's a man that donates his liver to a fellow church member he barely knew. An Ohio woman has a new lease on life thanks to the priceless gift from a fellow church member she barely knew. When Jason Stecksholt sat down and started reading the bulletin board before the Sunday service at St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Van Wert, Ohio, he read something that arrested his attention and felt God calling him to make a life-altering decision. Stecksholt read that Carol Motika, a 44-year-old mother with 4 sons, had stage 4 colorectal cancer, needed a liver transplant to survive. He said, I just had this feeling come over me that it was going to be me and that I needed to do this. I was called to do it. Answering the call was not easy for Stecksholt, who has 2 preteen children of his own. The 41-year-old would have an 8-hour surgery to remove the left lobe of his liver, which comprises about 40% of the organ. Another team of Cleveland Clinic surgeons skillfully transplanted the liver into Motika during a 12-hour procedure that was necessary to save her life. Motika did not know she was suffering from cancer until she struggled to complete a 17-mile hike with her family. She dealt with severe pain in her back and shoulder during and after the hike, so she went to the hospital the next day where Motika learned the shocking news. She had stage 4 colorectal cancer and it had spread to her liver. Motika underwent chemotherapy and it seemed to stop the spread of the cancer. Doctors told her her liver was severely damaged due to a genetic disorder and her health continued to decline. She had one hope to prolong her life, a liver transplant. Not wanting to be one of those 3,000 people a year who die waiting on a liver transplant, she sought a living donor who would be willing to help her. When Motika's the church youth director placed a notice in the bulletin, Steck Schult, and that could be Steck Schulte, not sure, ends in an E, did not hesitate to help. He said he had remained composed throughout the time leading up to the lengthy surgery. I was really calm throughout. I wasn't worried or nervous. Everybody was really professional, really helpful. He views his surgery in a positive light, noting his family and the Motikas have become close through the process. I gave her a liver and received a relationship with Carol and her family in return. That's a pretty good trade-off. So, besides your children, would you be willing to donate your liver to someone you didn't or barely knew? Here's a other uplifting story. A 110-year-old woman credits God. Well, wait a minute. That's politically incorrect. You can't credit God for blessing me with longevity. He's the one keeping me. A Texas woman who celebrated her 110th birthday Saturday isn't crediting diet, genetics for her long life. Instead, she's giving all the credit to God. Blessings of the Lord, He's the one keeping me. That's why I'm living, Elizabeth Francis told ABC 13 in Houston. Francis was born in Louisiana in 1909. That year, William Howard Taft was president. Wilbur and Orville Wright had flown their famous plane just 6 years earlier. World War I had not yet started. Civil War veterans were still alive. In 1909, the life expectancy of a woman in America was only 54 years old. See, back in the day, people used to work. Again, millennials, people had to work hard to keep up with things on the farm. You had to chop wood. You had to have plenty of wood to make it through the winter. You had to pick and potentially can your fruits and vegetables. You had to bale hay. You had to cut hay and then bale hay and put up hay. And trust me, putting up hay is not an easy job. One summer, a couple of summers, I was helping a friend of mine on his sod farm. Had a older gentleman come down, wanted to know if he could borrow my brother and I from my friend. So my brother and I went up and helped this old guy in Altoona put up hay in his barn. And I'm going to tell you what, talk about, I'd do sod every day of the week compared to putting up hay. It's hot. You sneeze, particularly me. And you have a pair of new jeans on, you're going to wear the front of them out. But the old guy, he got out his checkbook and he signed his name and he wanted me to fill in the price. He said, well, I'm not a rich man. I think I said, well, would $20 a piece be too much? I think we helped him for 4 hours, and minimum wage back in them days might have been $4 or $5 an hour. So we made $20 a piece. He wrote out one check, and I took it to the bank, and I cashed it and split it between me and my brother. But the interesting thing he said is nobody wants to work on the family farm anymore because it's more interesting to go up and work the gate or work the rides at Adventureland, because particularly if you're a young man, you just flirt with girls all evening. So boys don't want to detassel corn. They don't want to do sod. They don't want to bale hay. They don't want to put up hay. The stereotypical summer jobs that a lot of young men of my age were involved in, kids don't want to do, because you can go up and work at Adventureland. You can stand under an umbrella. You can take tickets at the gate, and you can remain relatively clean and cool and flirt with the girls. So the old guy was saying it was harder and harder and harder to get anybody to do work on the farm. You know, back in the Little House on the Prairie days, as I've said before, you had fruits and vegetables to can. You had wood to chop to maintain over the winter. You had other food storage to put away. You had to carry water. You had to put up hay for the animals. You had to get the eggs from the chickens. The eggs the chickens laid. You had to milk the cows. There's a number of chores on the farm, and people, if you were trapped in the opposite sex body, you were just, you were just trapped in the opposite sex body. You didn't have time to worry about your feelings because you had too much hard work to do. This 110-year-old African-American woman has probably done a lot of hard work in her life. But after everything she's done in her life, she credits God. For her birthday this year, Frances celebrated, surrounded by friends and family and community leaders and balloons. She wore a happy birthday crown. Among the community leaders joining the Francis family in celebration was the Houston mayor, Sylvester Turner. Louisiana-born in Houston, Texas resident, Francis enjoyed 6 generations of family members. According to ABC 13, the 110-year-old has remained mentally sharp and is relatively healthy. It's been really special because she's been able to watch and see all of her grandchildren grow up and be part of their lives. ABC 13 reports that the Francis family described the birthday party as a perfect way to celebrate this next century of life of the family's matriarch. According to Fox San Antonio, as of now, and this was written Monday, July 29th, or published Monday, July 29th, 2019. As of now, the oldest known living person is named Kane Tanaka. Tanaka is 116 years old and currently living in Japan. They live pretty old in Japan. I was thinking the oldest person I could recall was 113, but apparently the oldest person alive that they know of. Now, there may be some people who are older that don't have recorded birth certificates, maybe in some Amazonian type South American tribes. There may be people older than 116. But of the people who are born that they know how old they are, 116 is apparently the oldest living person living, and they live in Japan. But the 110-year-old woman credits God's blessing for her longevity. He's the one keeping me. Here's another, what I consider to be uplifting story. We hear a lot of stories about debauchery. We hear a lot of stories about the debauchery of the transgender, drag queen, homosexual agenda. But here's a story that an ex-drag queen, now living for Jesus, is courageously exposing the lifestyle for what it really is and helping others to get out of it. I went to a gender therapist when I was younger, and whenever I told them that I had been raped and molested as a child, they said, "Oh, you're just supposed to be a woman." I did try to seek out help, but all that was given me was the affirmation of homosexuality and transsexuality, says Kevin Witt. What sort of people are these drag queens who are brought into public library to read books to young children? Mass Resistance has already published several exposés of them revealing child molestation convictions, lurid sex business, and a lot of depraved and pornographic social media posts. Facing the truth about these men is both sad and traumatic for regular folks. But here we present the story of a former drag queen, Kevin Witt. Kevin's an amazing man. He lived it, but now he's freed from it. And he says in a video, "I was a homosexual, transsexual drag queen and a prostitute for 20 years. I used to go and perform in drag shows with the same people that are now in these libraries. I used to perform in every drag venue in Dallas. I used to host my own drag shows. 5.5 years ago, I found Jesus and I got set free." What does Jesus do? Does he put you in bondage? No, he sets you free. And you know why he sets you free? Because Christ tells every man and every woman, no matter what your propensity towards evil and what propensity towards certain vice, you may have been born with a proclivity to smoke or drink. You may have been born with a propensity to gamble. You may have been born with a propensity towards homosexual behavior. But the interesting thing is, for all of us, and we don't care who you are, ye must be born again. No one is going to be able to enter heaven without being born again. Sinfulness and the sins of the flesh won't enter into heaven. They can't enter into the kingdom. God cannot be in the presence of sin and evil. So, you may have been born a homosexual, transvestite, drag queen, and prostitute. But the cool thing is that's your old identity in sin. That's your identity in evil. When you are born again, you are given a new identity. And that new identity is in Jesus Christ. So that's the good story here. He was a former homosexual, a former transsexual, a former drag queen, and a former prostitute. Now he is no longer that identity. Today, he's much happier than he ever was before. He's the director of Kevin is the director of the Dallas Mass Resistance Chapter, and he's helping parents confront the drag queen horrors in public libraries. Kevin organized the most powerful protest outside, and the crew who filmed inside the recent Drag Queen Story Hour event at Grelier Park Public Library in Dallas, that story reverberated in conservative media around the country. But Kevin tells it like it really is. Most people aren't aware of the inner trauma and hurt that is really going on inside these people. Being a drag queen is being a part of a very self-destructive lifestyle, Kevin says. Whenever I was in the lifestyle, I was very depressed. I was an alcoholic. I had to be drunk all the time. To sleep with all kinds of different men. I slept with probably 5 guys a day. I was very sexually perverted. He was also very honest about how he and others became that way. I was molested as a kid. The majority of transsexuals, drag queens, and homosexuals that I know of and have encountered have either been sexually abused, molested, or they have been neglected emotionally by their father, or what have you. This is their main root cause, and this is what leads someone to a lifestyle of homosexuality. The psychological profession is part of the problem. What is equally shocking is how the psychological profession years ago caved into the LGBT movement and agenda, forsaking actual help to people and replacing it with political correctness. This is being horribly exacerbated with the anti-therapy laws across the country that the LGBT political machine is pushing, which allows professionals only to affirm destructive behavior and not treat its causes. As Kevin told us, I went to a gender therapist when I was younger, and whenever I told them I had been raped and molested as a child, they said, "Oh, you're just supposed to be a woman." I did try to seek out help, but all that was given me was the affirmation of homosexual and transsexual lifestyle. In the end, it was Jesus who helped save Kevin. He's giving back by attending gay pride parades across Texas and helping spread the word of God to the participants. Kevin is a great fighter and organizer for the force of good. We're thrilled to have him on board at Mass Resistance. Kevin's special insights will help us all in this battle we're fighting across the country. Aw, snap. Where'd my article go? Let me share this story first. Y'all know, if you haven't been living in a cave for the last week, there's a little teeny bit of an uproar about Baltimore, Maryland. Now, anybody who knows anything about Baltimore, knows anything about some of these Baltimore-style cities, know that a lot of places like Baltimore are succumbing to just outright decay. As I heard on a cable history discovery learning channel type program, it's much easier, it's much cheaper, rather than to get the permits that it takes to rebuild certain things, water systems, sewage systems. Rather, Detroit is another place I'm thinking of that the name wasn't coming to me. But the sad cases of places like Detroit and Baltimore, Cleveland, other of these major cities. It's just as easy to go out and find a new tract of land, lay your basic infrastructure of drainage, sewer, water mains, your fiber optic line, your electric lines, lay all your things, then to go into some of these cities and get the permits and everything it takes to disrupt services in the city. So people are building further and further and further out of the metro areas, and it's leaving a lot of these metro areas like Baltimore in just absolute sheer decay. But there's a little bit of a controversy about it because someone named President Donald J. Trump identified the problem. And it's not politically correct for someone with an R next to their name to shine the spotlight onto a problem that goes on in our urban cities, in our inner cities. And I've even been told that inner city is a new code word that replaces the old N word, you know. But the woman who exposed the trash crisis in Baltimore is now being threatened and intimidating, intimidating a black woman just for speaking out. That's actual racism. Now, the President of the United States has been called out as a racist because he challenged Elijah Cummings, who represents this district in Baltimore that he's criticizing as being rat infested. Somehow that's been linked to racism because he used the word infested and rat. But it's the truth. Apparently, Baltimore has had a rat infestation problem for decades. But now along come Donald Trump, shining the spotlight on it, and all of a sudden it's racist. But the woman who exposed the trash crisis, the woman who posted, I suppose, these things on Twitter, Facebook, whatever, the videos, I'm going to pop the story open here. This was a political commentator named Kimberly Klasick. Said she is now facing threats of hit pieces from her own reporters. She tweeted a series of videos of Baltimore showing dilapidated, abandoned houses, trash-filled yards, residents discussing broken water pipes, sinkholes, rodents, and roaches. After Klasick's tweeted videos, President Trump blasted House Oversight Government Reform Committee Chairman Elijah Cummings of Maryland for not doing more for his own home state and the district he lives that, well, he doesn't live there. Wouldn't even suggest he lives there. But instead of complaining about the conditions for illegal immigrants at the southwest border, how about get over and pay attention to your own district that is dilapidated, abandoned homes, trash-filled yards, residents discussing broken water pipes, sinkholes, rodents, and roaches, along with the crime and the drugs and everything that goes on in Elijah Cummings' district. But Trump's tweets only sparked a fury of commentary from Democratic lawmakers, pundits, and journalists claiming that Trump's comments were racist because of Baltimore's large black community and because Cummings is black. However, Klasick, who's also black, said she is now facing calls that reporters are doing a hit piece on her. So I'm receiving calls that reporters are working on a hit piece on me. It's truly disappointing. Residents ask if I could help get the trash removed. I filmed it, posted it. You would think people would be upset that their brothers and sisters are living in those conditions, she tweeted Saturday. Klasick continued to expose trash on the streets on Saturday, tweeting that people were upset that she filmed the trash. Hopefully this attention forces the city to clean up the mess and treat residents better. Let me see if I can... Kimberly Klasick. Klasick said she's facing attempts from hackers who are trying to hack her Twitter account. Sunday, she tweeted, Streffel's 24 hours. I received countless emails, calls, and texts claiming my hit piece is on the way. If this is the left's attempt to silence me, it only makes me want to fight harder for what is right, intimidating a black woman just for speaking out. Now, that's actual racism. Let me share something with you. David Webb, a black man, shared this quote from Booker T. Washington. Quote, there is a certain class of race problem solvers who don't want the patient to get well because as long as the disease holds out, they have not only an easy means of making a living, but also an easy medium through which to make themselves prominent before the public. This is Booker T. Washington. Let me just find out. Let me see when old Booker T. lived and died. Booker T. Washington was born in 1856, and he died in 1915. That was the year Ellen White died. Booker Washington was an American educator, or author, orator, and advisor to presidents of the United States. He was a dominant leader in the African American community. So Booker T was predicting people who would merchandise in racism. Poverty and racism will never go away as long as you got people exploiting it. So they themselves get rich. You know who some of these people are. You know some of these political black leaders who fly in and stir up a lot of trouble, and then they fly out when they fly in and they start a noise, and then when they fly out before, I don't know, Ferguson, St. Louis, Ferguson, Missouri burns down. There are race baiters, there are race agitators, there are race merchants, and they make money. They make fame on the backs of the downtrodden. But here's a black woman who calls out the fact that one of our major cities in the United States of America that is right around Washington, D.C., is in dilapidated condition. And merely because it's been pointed out that the high-powered Elijah Cummings this is his district. All of a sudden we have this kerfluffle. We have this uproar. Because the people who claim to want to rid this world of racism and poverty don't really want to do anything. I don't know what Elijah Cummings' worth. I bet he's worth a lot more than me. I'm sure he's worth a lot more than you. There's been millions and millions and millions and even billions of dollars sent to Baltimore, like there was sent to New Orleans to bolster up the dikes, the levees, and dams in New Orleans to withstand a Category hurricane. And when they found out, after the Army Corps of Engineers got into New Orleans, they found out that the material was substandard, there was shortcuts taken, and a lot of money pocketed by somebody who's never went to jail. And that's what happens in all these major cities. There's always people getting rich, stuffing their pockets full of government money while the people who the money was supposed to go and serve live in the dilapidated condition they're living in. And when the president points it out, all of a sudden it's a racial issue. When it was a black woman who posted the videos on Twitter. So, Ben Carson, a Seventh-day Adventist, and I believe leader of the HUD, Housing and Urban Development Department, is apparently in Baltimore today. So there's going to be some effort to help Baltimore. So it'll be interesting in the days to come how much help Elijah Cummings in Baltimore really wants, because if the truth of the matter would be known, they like it just like it is. That's how they keep getting put in office. Here's a story: cities without children, the cost of our urban idols. Yesterday I told you about a district in northern India where, according to reports, not a single girl was born for 3 months. The main cause of the shocking gender imbalance we see around the world, and especially in India, is sex-selective abortion. In reaction, some of us may be tempted to think, well, what do you expect from people who worship idols with blue skin and elephant heads? Well, that would be exactly the wrong reaction. After all, Western countries have idols too. Worshipping our idols also coincides with a lack of children, and not just baby girls. Recently in the Atlantic, Derek Thompson points out that despite a decade-long economic and cultural boom in our cities, America's urban rebirth is missing actual births. In fact, if current trends continue, the future of American cities is virtually childless. Well, let me again state, the white population is just above death rates. The black population is even with death rates. The Asian population is below death rates. The two fastest growing segments of the population in the United States and in the world is among Hispanics and Muslims. The average Muslim woman is 5 children per woman. That's about what the average Hispanic mother has, is about 5 kids per woman. But the black population is just barely keeping up with their births. Whites are not far behind. I think the average woman in America has 1.7 children. That's not even a full child. That's 1.7. The average man has 0.7 friends. That's not a whole friend. And the average woman has 1.7 children. So 1 child and 7/10 of a child. That's an average. I jest. They have whole babies. But we're not having enough children to keep up with society. How is a man and a woman who gets married and the man has a mom and a dad, the woman has a mom and a dad, so that's 4 people that is going to retire soon, and you got 2 children who must work in essence and pay for those 4 retirees. The Social Security system can't handle it. Because at some point in this country, there's going to be more retirees than there are workers. We're not having enough kids to sustain our country, so they think we need to import Muslims and Hispanics to have children for us. Recently, in the Atlantic, Derek Thompson points out that despite a decade-long economic and cultural boom in our cities, American urban rebirth is missing actual births. In fact, if current trends continue, future of American cities is virtually, I guess that's where I keep getting the virtual and future ADD or something. Virtually childless. Take New York City. Last year, for the first time in 40 years, the Big Apple's population shrank during a non-recession year. Since at least 2011, the number of babies born in the 5 boroughs has declined by 9%. In Manhattan, it's dropped 15%, again despite a pronounced economic recovery. At this rate, says Thompson, the city's infant population will halve in 30 years. Of course, part of this has to do with the rising cost of living in American cities. Increasingly, the only people who can afford to move here are rich, college-educated whites without children. Still, Thompson makes a compelling case that while it may appear that the cost of living is changing the composition of our cities, it actually works the other way around. The modern city has become the Epcot theme park for childless affluence, where the rich can act like kids without actually having to see any or raise any. This explains why prices are climbing while population is dropping. According to U.S. Census and American Community Survey data, while white college graduates without kids have increased by 20% in America's urban centers since 2000, families with kids have fled. Cities once had people of all ages and all stages, but they're now becoming revolving doors for people of a particular description, a particular moment in life. The gentrified, brunchable neighborhoods popping up everywhere and pushing families out aren't just temples to the idol of youthful self-indulgence. They facilitate the worship of work. Have you heard children are a blessing from God? The richest 25 metro areas in the country now account for half of the U.S. economy. And just 5 counties, mostly the famous Silicon Valley, contains half of the nation's internet and web portal jobs. This is the sort of environment in which only the young and childless can thrive. Companies that set up shop in these major downtown areas increasingly demand a set of life choices that Thompson dubs workism, delaying marriage and family in the favor of intense, high-paying jobs that go largely to support adult-centric lifestyles. In other words, they're swapping capital for kids. This service to modern urban idols not only results in the cities devoid of children, it even has political effects, concentrating blue voters in tiny regions where their ballots won't change the outcome of elections. This deepens already sharp regional divisions. It drives our nation's political fever even higher. According to Thompson, there are some things city governments can do to help reverse or at least slow the progress of creating childless cities. Notably, add family-friendly spaces and more affordable housing. Still, one need not read between the lines of the article to realize it's not just zoning laws that have turned our cities into theme parks for grown-ups. The true blame should be placed on the culture that worships the wrong things. It's no coincidence that the city's highest abortion rates and the lowest rates of church attendance are found both in our major cities. Yes, developing countries who kill their children surely have a lot to answer for, but we in the West are only deceiving ourselves if we think our false gods are any less demanding. That pretty much nails it on the head. Tucker Carlson was sharing a story last night about nations who are encouraging birth rates. After decades of limiting population growth, more than 3 years after lifting China, the government is now urging young families to have more babies. More than 3 years after lifting its one-child policy, the nation's fertility rate remains stubbornly low, leaving officials scrambling for ideas to spur a baby boom. Today, the world's lowest fertility rates are scattered across Europe, East Asia, and countries such as South Korea, Singapore, Greece, Spain, Italy. America's fertility rate remains among the highest in the developed world, but it can be said to be underperforming because, unlike most countries, America has shown no sign of post-GFC revival. There was a story Tucker was sharing last night where they were paying women money to have children, to be married, to stay at home and raise their kids. I would like to say Finland, but I don't know that it's Finland. Here's 6 creative ways that countries have tried to up their birth rates. Get down during vacation. Eat mince and make babies on a national night. Go home early every 3rd Wednesday and get busy. Have a baby, win a refrigerator. No babies, higher taxes. Maybe it was Romania. In the 60s, Romania was approaching zero population growth, a terrifying prospect for a communist nation that held Marxist principles that economic health lay in a robust labor union. So starting in 66, the government took some drastic and chilling measures. They chose the stick rather than the carrot. Though there were tax and monetary incentives to encourage people to have children, they also punished people for not having them. Childless men and women over the age of 25, regardless of marital status, were subject to a new tax that could be as much as 20% of their income. Divorce was also made incredibly difficult. In 1967, only 28 divorces were allowed, a precipitous decrease from the 26,000 the year before. Police were installed in hospitals to make sure that no illegal abortions were performed, and legal importation of birth control was halted. It worked, at least in the short term. The baby bounce was significant. 273,000 in 1966 to 527,000 in 1967, but that only lasted as long as the police remained in hospitals. Even more draconian measures were given to raise it. Women were subjected to monthly gynecological exams to detect pregnancies in the earliest stages to ensure that pregnancies came to term. These exams were performed by demographic command units. It would also interrogate childless individuals and couples about their sex lives. Pretty grim. The campaign to forcibly control Romanian women's fertility ended with the overthrow of the regime in the bloody revolution of 1989. Then the sixth way is to hang out with a robot baby. Japan is suffering from a serious low birth rate, so low that in 1,000 years, one demographer claims, the Japanese will be extinct. The country's fertility rate fell below 2 children per woman in 1975, and as of around 2015 was around 1.42. That means that its elderly population is starting to outpace its young. In 2012, toiletries company Unicharm said the sales of its adult diapers slightly surpassed baby diapers for the first time since the company moved into the elderly market in 1987. Hey, there's a kick in the pants. Adult diapers outselling baby diapers. But I don't remember the story. It was an interesting story that they were encouraging women financially to have children, to get married, to raise their children at home. I know in a world of 7-point-some billion people, I don't know that we need a lot of extra mouths to feed. But God promises that He provides for everyone. So, as I said, the only reason anyone is starving to death is because someone's starving them. It's not because there's not plenty to go around. So, we're going to go to our SRN News, and we will be back after the news, and we'll get into our all things Pharisees. And we're going to talk about Ezekiel in our Sabbath school lesson. But we're going to go to the news.
KPOG 102.9 FM, Grimes.
With SRN News, I'm Keith Peters in Washington. The Federal Reserve is cutting its key interest rate for the first time in more than a decade.
The Fed is cutting its benchmark federal funds rate by 1/4 point to a range of 2 to 2.25%. It's the Fed's first rate cut since December 2008, when the U.S. economy was in the depths of the Great Recession. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell.
It is intended to insure against downside risks from weak global growth and trade policy uncertainty.
As for what's ahead, Powell says the Fed
will act as appropriate to sustain the expansion with a strong labor market and inflation near its symmetric 2% objective.
Language that markets have seen as a signal for possible future rate cuts. However, stocks took a nosedive when Powell added the Fed does not see a long cycle of cuts ahead. Ben Thomas, Washington.
The Trump administration has announced a massive overhaul of drug prescription laws that would allow the importation of lower-cost drugs.
The proposal, unveiled by Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar, would allow states, wholesalers, and pharmacists to get FDA approval to import certain medications from Canada that are also available here. The importation idea won praise from Iowa Republican Chuck Grassley, who, along with Democrat Amy Klobuchar, have sponsored legislation to facilitate importation. While the idea is opposed by the pharmaceutical industry, which has warned against counterfeit and unsafe drugs, lower prescription drug costs has been a priority of President Trump.
Correspondent Wally Hines reporting. Images showing police beating a young couple during an unauthorized protest in Moscow have appeared on Russian social media. The woman and her boyfriend say they were shaken by the violence, but it also strengthened their resolve. With another protest planned for Saturday, city authorities show no sign of backing down, and Moscow's mayor says the force used by police was completely appropriate. A down day on Wall Street as the Dow plunged 333 points, the Nasdaq dropped 99, the S&P 500 lower by 33. This is SRN News. Planned Parenthood and the ACLU are suing over a Missouri abortion law. SRN's Greg Clugston has the story.
The two organizations are trying to stop a Missouri law from going into effect on August 28th that bans abortions beyond the 8th week of pregnancy without exceptions in cases of rape or incest. In their federal lawsuit, Planned Parenthood and the ACLU allege that the pro-life bill, signed in May by Missouri Governor Mike Parson, is part of an unrelenting campaign to deny patients the health care they seek and to which they are entitled. Greg Clugston, SRN News.
American and Canadian Christians helped more than 100 European Jews immigrate to Israel this week. The 121 immigrants from Ukraine were welcomed by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at a special reception ceremony held at the foot of their plane. The flight was organized by the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, which helps Jews from around the world emigrate to Israel. This is SRN News. A Middle East summit is being planned for Camp David. The latest from the Media Line's Charles B. Blazier.
President Donald Trump will reportedly host an Israeli-Palestinian peace summit at Camp David sometime before Israel's September 17th elections. President Trump's senior advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner is slated to invite Arab leaders to attend the confab during his six-nation trip to the Middle East, which begins Thursday in Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not expected to travel to Camp David, as sources say his presence would make it more difficult for Arab states to justify their attendance. At the retreat, President Trump will lay out his vision for peace in broad strokes, with numerous reports claiming that he will forgo committing to the formation of a Palestinian state. I'm Charles B. Blazier, SRN News, Jerusalem.
More details at themedialine.org and srnnews.com. I'm Keith Peters in Washington.
Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:10. From your friends, APOG 102.9, the power of God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Matthew 5:9.
Every weekday on the Power of God, KPOG 102.9 FM, and live on webcast1live.com. Join us for A View from the Pew. Should you be offended, provoked, triggered, intimidated, shocked, confused, or inspired to think independently, call our studio lines at 515-442-KPOG and join the conversation. After all, it's your voice we want to hear. The View from the Pew on KPOG and webcast1live.com. Weekdays from 4 to 6 on the Power of God.
Now, here's today's host, Frank the Verse Thomas.
Thank you. It is Frank the Verse Thomas here at View from the Pew. That's heard every day, Monday through Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. here at Jordan Crossing Church, and that is at the...
Live from the Yellow Blue Studios, your home for the light from LED Lighting. This is KPOG Grimes, West Des Moines.
And if you'd like to contact the show with your opinions, your comments, any potential stories you'd like to hear, what you think of the stories we're sharing, you can do so by following this simple set of instructions.
We want to hear from you, so give us a call on the Service Legends Talk and Text line, 515-442-5764. That's 515-442-KPOG.
So I will find, it might be Finland, that Tucker was talking about last night. Finland gives away a maternity package of various warm weather clothes, pajamas, books to families and newborns, or a cash grant. Singapore has announced that every baby born in 2015 will get a lot of things. Says here about half of the world faces the same demographic problem. Not enough babies are being born to keep up with the aging population. As a result, countries have been trying all kinds of measures to get citizens in the mood for procreating. So apparently a lot of countries see the fact that Russian authorities have offered women who gave birth 9 months later Around the country's National Day, a chance to win an SUV, refrigerators, or cash. Money. The most traditional means of encouraging birth rates is so-called baby bounties, stipends, tax breaks, and other financial incentives for families with newborns that have been used in most countries facing an aging population. In France, a combination of stipends, expanded child care options, and other policy measures have been credited for increasing the country's birth rate to be one of Europe's highest. Families with 3 or more children receive discounts across France. Maybe it was France. We're talking that they were encouraging women to have at least 4 children and paying women to do so. I'll figure out who was the country I was thinking about, and I will share that with you at a later date. So today we're going to do our lesson study a little bit later, and today we talked about Amos on Monday. We talked about Micah yesterday, and today we're going to be talking about Ezekiel. But before we get to that, I want to share with you all things Pharisaical. And I have some stories that out of the Bible that I want to share with you. Let me start with this story out of Matthew 16, 5 through 12. And when the disciples were come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. Then Jesus said unto them, Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, Is it because we have taken no bread? Which when Jesus perceived, said unto them, O ye of little faith, why reason ye among yourselves, because ye have brought no bread? Do ye not understand, neither remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000, and how many baskets ye took up? Neither the 7 loaves of the 4,000, or how many baskets ye took up? How is it you do not understand that I spake to you not in concerning bread, that ye should beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees? Then understood they how he bade them not aware of the leaven of the bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. Yeast. This is from a website I found. The leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. In Mark 8:14-15, Jesus cautioned them, saying, Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Yeast is the secret to making bread rise. When added to a lump of bread dough, the yeast ferments. The starches in the dough causes the dough to increase in size. Without yeast to the leaven, the loaf comes out of the oven is flat. Remarkably, it takes little yeast to make dough rise. A small amount is sufficient to leaven dough thoroughly. Jesus alludes to this phenomenon of yeast making dough rise in order to teach a spiritual lesson. It is the natural image to use because the Lord has just fed 4,000 people with 7 loaves of bread, and the disciples are noting how they forgot to bring enough bread for a meal with them in the boat. But Jesus instead issues this warning, Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. Since it only takes a small amount of yeast to imperceptibly yet change the entire mass of the dough. Leavening agents transforms an entire lump of dough. Jesus must mean that it takes only a little bit of what the Pharisees and Herod have to offer to ruin a person. We say ruin because Christ is giving a warning statement, because leaven almost always represents sin in the New Testament. Only Jesus' parable of leaven uses leaven in a positive sense. Just a smidgen of sin of the Pharisees and Herod. It sufficed to transform what is good and useful into something bad and useless. But what does that leaven signify? Well, for this article, it's hard to discern, for the Pharisees and Herod Antipas had little in common. The Pharisees were devoted to their study of Mosaic law, and Antipas was anything but devout. Christ may be referring to Herod and the Pharisees' contentment with Roman rule. Herod enjoyed political power because of Rome, and though many Jews wanted Rome overthrown, the Pharisees were basically fine with the Romans as long as Caesar allowed them to study the law in peace. However, contentment with Roman governance does not fully capture what Jesus meant by leaven. Unbelief in Christ is the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. Unbelief motivated in part by fear of Roman reprisal against the Jews if Jesus were acclaimed as Messiah. But their unbelief was ultimately due to their hard hearts. When we harden our hearts, even just a little bit, and refuse to obey God on what we consider a minor matter, we introduce leaven into our lives that can spread to other areas. It's imperative, therefore, that we regularly repent of our disobedience and seek to obey the Lord in all of life. We should be striving for obedience in all matters, not just the big ones. It's many times through life's smallest choices and smallest details that comes the largest consequences. Just go indiscriminately out and have sex one time, and you maybe have the obligation to take care of a baby the rest of your life. Just one indiscriminate sexual opportunity may give you HIV/AIDS or some sexually transmittable disease. Get in an automobile accident and make one wrong decision, you might lose your life or limb. There's just things, that you think sometimes it's the big decisions that come with the big consequences. The big consequences come with the big decisions. But many times it's the smallest decisions we make that carry the largest consequences. So Christ is telling his disciples to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Now I'm going to share with you out of Ellen White this is from chapter 44 of Desire of Ages. Jesus sighed deeply in his spirit, and turning from the group of cavilers, re-entered the boat with his disciples. In sorrowful silence, they again crossed the lake. They did not, however, return to the place that they had left, but directed their course towards Bethsaida, where the 5,000 had been fed. Upon reaching the further side, Jesus said, "Take heed." That sounds pretty serious when Christ says take heed, and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. The Jews had been accustomed since the days of Moses to put away leaven from their houses at the Passover season, and had thus been taught to regard it as a type of sin. Yet the disciples failed to understand Jesus. In their sudden departure from Magdala, they had forgotten to take bread, and they had with them only one loaf. To this circumstance, they understood Christ to refer, warning them not to buy bread of a Pharisee or a Sadducee. But their lack of faith and spiritual insight had often led them to similar misconceptions of his words. Now Jesus reproved them for thinking that he who had fed thousands with a few fishes and a few loaves could in that solemn warning have referred merely to temporal food. There was a danger that the crafty reasoning of the Pharisees and Sadducees would leaven his disciples with unbelief, causing them to think lightly of the works of Christ. The disciples were inclined to think that their master should have granted them the demand for a sign in heaven. They believed that he was fully able to do this, and such a sign would put his enemies to silence. They did not discern the hypocrisy. Months afterward, when they were gathered together, an innumerable multitude of people, insomuch that they had trod one upon another, Jesus repeated the same teaching. He began to say to his disciples, first of all, beware again of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. The leaven in meal works imperceptibly, changing the whole mass to its own nature. So if hypocrisy is allowed to exist in the heart, it permeates the character of the life. A striking example of the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. Christ had already rebuked in announcing the practice of Corban, by which a neglect of filial duty was concealed under the pretense of liberality to the temple, described the Pharisees were insinuating deceptive principles. They concealed the real tendency of their doctrine. Now, Corban, of course, was the idea that you were going to donate some land to the upkeep of the temple. In reality, they donated this land to conceal and fraudulently conceal it from their parents and the upkeep of their parents in their elderly years. And in reality, they used the land for their own ill-gotten purposes while supposedly donating it to the upkeep of God's house. God said, you hypocrites, you tell me I can't eat with unclean hands. You tell me that it is work to gather some grain in my hand on the Sabbath and eat it. You hypocrites, you continually break the fifth commandment. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days shall be long upon the earth. The same influence is working today through those who try to explain the law of God in such a way as to make it conform to their practices. This class does not attack the law openly, but put forward speculative theories and undermine its principles. They explain away as to destroy its force. The hypocrisy of the Pharisees. As I mentioned, the Sadducees, God basically accused of unbelief because they didn't believe in God as a triune God. They believed in God as a monotheist God, one God. There was no personalities or other parts of God such as the Holy Spirit and Christ the Son. There were no angels. There was no resurrection. They didn't believe in stuff. So Christ accused the Pharisees of unbelief. But he slammed constantly the Pharisees for being hypocrites. The hypocrisy of the Pharisees was a product of self-seeking. The glorification of themselves was the object of their lives. It was this that led them to pervert and misapply scriptures and blinded them to the purpose of Christ's mission. The disciples were often vacillating between faith and unbelief. They did not discern the treasures of wisdom hidden in Christ. Even the disciples, though outwardly they had left all for Jesus' sake, had not in heart ceased great things for themselves. And Judas was the leader of self-seeking. It was this spirit that prompted the strife as pardon me, who should be greatest. It was that came between them and Christ, making them so little in sympathy with his mission of self-sacrifice, so slow to comprehend the mystery of redemption. As leaven is left to complete its work, it will cause corruption and decay. So does the self-seeking spirit cherish the work of defilement and ruin of the soul. Among the followers of our Lord today, as of old, how widespread is this subtle, deceptive sin? How often our service to Christ, our communion with one another, is marred by the secret desire to self-exalt? How ready the thought of self-gratulation and longing for human approval. It is the love of self, the desire for an easier way that God has appointed, that leads to the substitution of human theories and tradition for divine precepts. To his disciples, the warnings of Christ are clear. Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. That's the way it is with sin. When sin comes into your life, you don't recognize it immediately. It's just like when you are formulating dough, kneading it with your fingers and hands. And you set it and you cover it with some sort of a wrap, and you come back and you uncover it to find that little amount of dough is raised into a big mass. You don't recognize. Well, that's not how I left it. I just left this small little ball of dough, and all of a sudden, that's how sin explodes in your life. You don't immediately recognize what you've become. And when you allow the leaven of hypocrisy into your heart, it will change and permeate the character of your whole life. Just as that little bit of yeast takes over the whole mass of the dough. Now, from Luke 18, 9 to 14 comes this story. And he spake this parable unto certain which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I'm not as other men. I don't vote as other men. I'm not an extortioner. I'm not unjust, an adulterer, or even as this publican. In fact, I fast twice a week, and I give tithes of all that I possess. And the publican, standing far off, would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. For every man that exalted himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. Now this story is from Matthew 21:18 to 22:14. Now in the morning, as he returned to the city, he hungered. And Christ saw a fig tree in the way, and he came to it, and found nothing thereon but leaves only. And he said unto it, Let no fruit. How much fruit? No fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, How soon is the fig tree withered away? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith, and doubt not, ye shall not only do which is done to the fig tree, but also ye shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be cast into the sea, and it shall be done. And all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing ye shall receive. And we come unto the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came unto him, and as he was teaching, and said, By what authority doest thou things? And who gavest thou thee this authority? And Jesus answered them, I will ask you one thing, which if ye tell me, I will in likewise tell you by what authority I do these things. The baptism of John, whence was it? From heaven or of men? They reasoned among themselves, saying, If we shall say from heaven, he will say, Then why did not you believe him? But if we shall say of men, we fear the people, for all hold John as a prophet. And they answered Jesus and said, We cannot tell. And he said unto them, Neither I tell you by what authority I do these things. Smack down! I mean, wouldn't you just love to have been a witness to that in real time? and watch them walk away, kicking the dirt and stomping their feet. But what think ye? A certain man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, Son, go to work today in my vineyard. He answered and said, I will not. But afterwards repented and went. And he came to the second son and said likewise, and he answered and said, I go, sir, and went not. Tell me, whether of them twain did the will of his father? They say unto him, the first. Jesus said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that the publicans and the harlots go into the kingdom of God before you. For John came to you in the way of righteousness, and ye believed him not. But the publicans and the harlots believed him, and ye, when ye have seen it, repented, not afterward, that ye might believe him. Here another parable. There was a certain householder which planted a vineyard, and hedged around it, and digged a winepress, built a tower, and let it out to the husbandman, and went into a far country. And when the time of the fruit drew near, and he sent his servants to the husbandman, that they might receive the fruits of it, the husbandman took his servants, beat one, and killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all he sent unto them his son, saying, They will reverence my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, This is his heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance. And they caught him, they cast him out of the vineyard, and slew him. When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what will he do unto those husbandmen? They will say unto him, He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and he will let out of his vineyard unto the other husbandmen, which shall render him the fruits in their season. Jesus said unto them, Did ye never read in Scripture, the stone which the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner? This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. Therefore I say unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you, and given to a nation bringing forth the fruits thereof. And whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken, but whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him into powder. And when the chief priests and Pharisees had heard these parables, they perceived that he spake of them. When they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitude, because they took him for a prophet. But again, Jesus spake unto them again by parables, and said, The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king, which made a marriage for his son, and sent forth his servants to call them that were bidden to the wedding, and they would not come. Again they sent forth other servants, saying, Tell them which are bidden, Behold, I prepared a dinner. My oxen, my fatlings are killed, and all things are ready. Come and eat. Come unto the marriage. But they made light of it. And they went their ways, one to his farm, and other to his merchandise. And the remnant took his servants, and entreated them spitefully, and slew them. But when the king heard thereof, he was wroth. And he sent forth his armies, and destroyed those murderers, and burned up their cities. Then he said to his servants, The wedding is ready, but they which were bidden were not worthy. Therefore go into the highways and the hedges, and ye shall find bid to come to the marriage. So those servants went out into the highways and hedges, and gathered together as much as they found, both good and bad, and the wedding was furnished with guests. And when the king came in to see the guests, he saw a man there which had not a wedding garment on. And he said unto him, Friend, how comest thou in hither, not having a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, Bind him hand and foot, and take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen. Now from Luke 21, 1-4. And he looked up, and he saw rich men casting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw a certain poor widow casting in 2 mites. And Jesus said, Of a truth I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast more into than all the others. For all these have of their abundance cast into the offerings of God, but she of her penury hath cast in all the living that she has. And this version from Mark 12:38-44. And he said unto them in this doctrine, Beware of the scribes, which love to go in long clothing, and love salutations in the marketplace, and the chiefs' seats in the synagogues, and the uppermost rooms at the feast, which devour widows' houses for a pretense, make long prayers, long stuffy prayers, that bore both God, men, and angels. I would suggest to you that the reason why the Pharisee stands in his long, stuffy prayers, repeating, Lord, 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 is because he so neglected his personal privileges during the week of his prayer and his study and his devotion and his meditation, that he's trying to make it all up in one fell swoop like he doeth God a favor. Our public prayers are to be short, sweet, and to the point. You want to pray long, stuffy prayers, you do so in your prayer closet, and God doth not weary of those prayers. I prayed to God once on a trip to Chicago for 6 hours while driving a car, nonetheless. Those are the times when you pray your long, tedious, stuffy prayers, and you hammer it out with God when no one else is listening and observing. But when you got hungry children and hungry people and you have things going on, you keep your prayers short and to the point. But they've so neglected their personal prayer life all week that they think they're going to make up to God for it all in one long, stuffy, tedious, strung-out prayer. And friend, those prayers are going no higher than the ceiling. These same men devour the widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers, and these shall receive greater damnation. And Jesus sat over against the treasury, and behold, how much people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. But there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto his disciples. You remember how I said yesterday that Jesus always, anything Jesus done was for a precise point. There was nothing that ever went wasted. So in life, he was always pointing out a lesson of truth to his disciples, pointing out some of their personal error and hypocrisy, pointing out the hypocrisy and the unbelief of the Pharisees and Sadducees. He never missed an opportunity to teach a profound lesson to his followers, to thwart his spies. So he called upon his disciples, and he said unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow has cast in more than all. How many, Bob Montserrat? All that which have cast into the treasury, because they were giving a small pittance of what they had. This woman, this poor woman who gave the 2 mites, was all she had. Her gift. So as I have tried to explain to my agnostic friend Christian, money in and of itself is not intrinsically evil. What is evil is the will of the person, or what is good is the will of the person who is using it. A fork can feed you, but you can also stab somebody to death with a fork. A gun, a knife, is not intrinsically evil. It's the person who picks it up and the intent on which they use it. So Christ said that a rich man had a better chance of getting through the eye of a needle, or a camel had a better chance of going through the eye of a needle than a rich man going to heaven. Well, some Christians want to jump on that and they want to make it that money's evil. No, it's what you use your money for. Are you using your money for yourself and degrisement? Are you using your money to exalt yourself? To seek self? Or are you using your money to build the kingdom of God? For she cast in, for they all did cast in of their abundance. They had much. They could afford to give much, but it was a pittance. They could have given probably 10 or 20 times the amount they gave, and it still wouldn't have hurt them. But this woman gave all she had. Now let me go back to chapter, I believe it is 30. Where was I at? I think it was 38. Oh, wait a minute. I had another chapter here that I wanted to share some of with you. I thought it was 38, but it's not. Oh, here it is, 67. Woes on the Pharisees. I just wanted to share this with you before we move on to Sabbath school. It was the last day of Christ's teaching in the temple. Of the vast throngs that were gathered at Jerusalem, the attention of all had been attracted to him. The people had crowded the temples watching the contest that had been in progress, and they eagerly caught every word that fell from Christ's lips. Never before had such a scene been witnessed. There stood a young Galilean bearing no earthly honor or royal badge. Surrounding him were priests in their rich apparel, rulers with robes and badges significant of their exalted stations, scribes with scrolls in their hands to which they made frequent reference. Jesus stood calmly before them with the dignity of a king. Challenge after challenge he met, and he looked unflinchingly upon his adversaries, who rejected and despised his teaching, and who thirsted for his life. Challenge after challenge he met, presenting them the pure, bright truth in contrast to the darkness and errors of the priests and the Pharisees. He had set before these leaders their real condition and the retribution sure to follow, persistent in their evil deeds. The warning had been faithfully given. yet another work remained for Christ to do. Another purpose was still to be accomplished. The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe and do, but do not ye after their works, for they say and do not. The scribes and the Pharisees claimed to be invested with divine authority similar to that of Moses. They assumed to take his place as the expounders of the law and the judges of the people. As such, they claimed from the people the utmost deference and obedience. Jesus bade his hearers to do that which the rabbis taught according to the law, but not to follow their example of hypocrisy and unbelief. They themselves did not practice their own teaching. So the Pharisees did not keep the law. So if someone accuses you of being a Pharisee, they're accusing you of being lawless. They taught much that was contrary to Scripture. Jesus said they bind heavy burdens and grievous to be borne and to lay on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their own fingers. The Pharisees enjoyed a multitude of regulations, having their foundations in tradition and unreasonably restricting personal liberty. And of certain portions of the law they so explained it as to impose upon the people observances which they themselves secretly ignored, and from which, when it served their purposes, they actually claimed exemption. Sound like politics? You remember how the Acorn, the group that registered voters to vote, advocated for minimum wage and health care for everyone, but they themselves exempted themselves from paying a minimum wage to their workers or providing health care. Do as I say, not as I do. It's how all leaders, they exempt themselves from their own rules and their own laws. To make a show of their piety was their constant aim. Nothing was held too sacred to serve this end. But all their works they do to be seen for men. They enlarge their borders of their garments. They love the uppermost room of the feasts and the chiefs in the synagogues and greetings in the markets, to be called of men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But be not ye called Rabbi, for one is your master, even Christ, and all are ye brethren. And call no man your father upon this earth, for there's one Father which is in heaven. Neither be ye called master, for one is your master, even Christ. So we don't call any man reverend. We don't call any man father. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for neither ye go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. By perverting the Scriptures, the priests and the lawyers blinded the minds of the men who would otherwise have received a knowledge of Christ's kingdom, and that inward divine life was essential to true holiness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees! Woe to you, hypocrites! For ye devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore ye shall receive the greater damnation. You only make a show of piety. So we're going to get to our lesson study today. Maybe we'll pick up on another day a little bit more of the woe to the Pharisees. Today, Wednesday, and you're listening to Frank the Verse Thomas here at View from a Pew. And that's heard on KPOG 102.9 FM, Grimes, West Des Moines. If you were to ask a group of Christians about the sins of Sodom, chances are many would launch into a description of its various sexual sins and other forms of depravity. After all, Genesis 19, 1 through 13 depicts a sick and warped society more than ripe for its destruction. 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening. Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When he saw him, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city of Sodom, both young and old, and the people to the last man, surrounded the house and called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out that we may know them." Lot went out to the men at the entrance of the door and shut the door after him. "I beg you, my brothers, do not act wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let them bring them out to you, and do with them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back." They said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." They pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down, and the men reached out with their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both great and small, so that they wore themselves out groping for the door. The men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here, sons-in-laws, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city? Bring them out of this place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people have become so great before the Lord. The Lord has sent us to destroy it." Now, some will argue that it was the fact that they weren't being hospitable. Because you know how when you have a stranger in your land, and the knock came at the door when the man was asleep, "I have a stranger in my house. I need a couple of loaves of bread." The man says, "I don't want to get up. I don't want to get up." They slept around the fire, and the surrounding family slept around, and you had the pets and the animals and the family and grandma and grandpa, and it was concentric circles of things. And the man had to get up to get bread. He had to step over everybody in the house to get to the bread. And you're not going to be able to do that without waking a few people up. "Go away, don't bother me." So many will argue that these men were destroyed because they weren't being hospitable. They were destroyed because they wanted sexual relations with the 2 men inside, who were God's angels. Interestingly enough, though, the answer is more complicated than just that. Consider Ezekiel's description. "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. In fact, they probably robbed and stole from the poor and needy." Though clearly the Lord was not going to overlook other forms of depravity found in the city, Ezekiel's focus here was on the economic injustice and lack of care for those in need. Could it be that in the eyes of God, these economic sins were just as bad as the sexual sins? Coming after the time of Amos, Micah, Isaiah, Ezekiel's early prophecies sound a familiar note of warning of coming destruction. However, after Jerusalem falls, to the Babylonian and its people are taken captive, Ezekiel's focus shifts more fully to God's promise of restoration. Ezekiel 34, 2-4 says, "Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, even to the shepherds, thus saith the Lord God, Ah, shepherds of Israel, who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you've not healed, the injured you've not bound up, the strayed you've not brought back, the lost you've not sought. With a force and a harshness you have ruled them." In Ezekiel 34, Therefore, ye shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. As I live, declare the Lord, surely because my sheep have become prey, and my sheep have become food for all the wild beasts, since there was no shepherd, and because my shepherds have not searched for his sheep, but the shepherds have not only not searched for my sheep, but they fed themselves, and not fed the sheep. Therefore, ye shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I am against the shepherds, and I will require my sheep at their hand to put a stop to their feeding the sheep. No longer shall the shepherds feed themselves. I will rescue my sheep from their mouths, that they may not be food for them. For thus says the Lord God, behold, I myself will search for my sheep, and I will seek them out. And the shepherd seeks out his flock when he's among his sheep, that they've been scattered. So I will seek out my sheep, and I will rescue them from all places where they have been scattered, on a day of clouds and thick darkness. And I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them into their own land, and I will feed them on the mountains of Israel, by the ravines, and in all the habited places of the country. I will feed them with good pasture, and on the mountain heights of Israel shall be their grazing land. They shall lie down in good grazing land, and on a rich pasture they shall feed on the mountains of Israel. I myself will be the shepherd of my sheep, and I myself will make them lie down, declares the Lord, and I will seek the lost. I will bring back the stray, and I will bind up the injured, and I will strengthen the weak, and the fat and the strong I will destroy. I will feed them in justice. Compare God's assessment with the corrupt leaders of Israel and his own shepherding. How does the treatment of the weakest sheep contrast with his methods? Well, his shepherds ignored the sheep. They fed themselves. They stuffed their own pie hole, while they done nothing for the lost. Christ, in contrast, is going to seek out the lost, nurse them back to health, feed them, clothe them, whatever it takes. He's going to take care of his sheep. Even as bad as they had been, so as to be compared with Sodom, the Lord was still reaching out to them in hopes of their turning away from their wickedness. In God's renewed plan for his people, they would be back in their land. Jerusalem would be destroyed, and the temple would be rebuilt. The festivals God gave would be again celebrated, and the land would again be divided equally among his people. It seems obvious that God's intention, that his plan for his people at first was given to Moses and the people of Israel. After their rescue from Egypt would be restarted with the return of his people from captivity. This included concern for the weakest members of society, as well as those who might be considered outsiders. And if you would like to read, and I don't have time to read it today, but suggested reading for this is Ezekiel 47:13 through Ezekiel 48:29. So that is a pretty good chunk of reading, and it's dividing up the land, and it's how the 12 tribes of Israel and how the land was divided up amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. It seems obvious that God's intention was that his plan for his people, first given to Moses and the people of Israel after their rescue from Egypt, would be restarted. And they would include concern for the weakest members of society and those who would be considered outsiders. How important is it to you that our God, who is a God who offers second chances and more even to his people who have gone wrong after having the chance to make better choices? Well, that's of the paramount importance, because none of us, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Repeatedly. Not just a single time, but repeatedly we have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And God has given many of us chance after chance after chance to repent and turn our foot from wickedness and turn towards righteousness. Some people, it doesn't seem that they have as many chances. But this is the prerogative of God, of the sovereign of the universe. But I can say for one, I've been given more chances than I ever deserved. And I'm sure if you're listening to me, you can say the same thing. Pardon me. But time and time again, we stray from God. Time and time again, we chase after our idols. Time and time again, God goes out and finds us. Now, you have the parable of the lost coin and you have the parable of the lost sheep. The parable of the lost sheep, the sheep knows it's lost. The coin doesn't. The coin has no idea it's lost. The coin represents people who are in a state of denial. They have no idea they're lost. Some of them are our children. When we got to go out and seek them, we got to go out and find them. God has gave us responsibility to take care of what He has loaned us. Our children are on loan from God. We have children that are lost and they don't know it, and it's up to us to go out and save them and make sure that we find them and bring them to safety. The sheep, on the other hand, knows that it's lost. But God picks it up gently and puts it to His bosom. And He takes it back and He carries it back safely to health, to nurse it back to health. He doesn't reprimand it and browbeat it for being lost. He nurses it back to health. And this is our call, to go out and find those who know they are lost, and to go out and find those who have no idea they're lost. So until tomorrow, this is Frank the Verse Thomas here at View from the Pew, and that's heard on KPOG 102.9 FM.
KPOG 102.9 FM, Grimes.